All right. My name is Laura. I'm a junior sponsorship here at McMaster's Design League. For our Intro to UI/UX and Figma workshop, we'll be hearing from Rita Wong. Rita has been leading the team of designers at Knowledgehook for over 5 years and has infused design thinking into Knowledgehook's corporate culture and is responsible for delivering better user experiences through visual and strategic design. So without further ado, the floor is all yours, Rita.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Rita. Here's the picture of me on the screen. I work at Knowledgehook, and my team has been working on revamping an education software that lets teachers assign math to students. And we're currently giving the student experience a facelift. So we're improving the UI and the UX overall. So I feel giving this workshop on UI and UX and Figma is right up my alley, since that's what we've been focused on doing for the past 2 years. This is where a lot of my knowledge on UI UX comes from, and just really understanding the goals of the product really well. So I want to start off with this meme. Don't know if some of you have ever seen this or familiar. I was looking for something relatable, so I hope ketchup is still a staple condiment for you younger generations. So this is one of my favorite images explaining UI UX. So on the left, you have your Heinz ketchup glass bottle that represents UI design. The look and feel is nice. It's beautiful, it's iconic, and the glass is high end. But anyone who's ever tried to get ketchup out of this bottle, I think we can all agree that the user experience sucks. It's impossible to pour. You either nothing comes out or too much comes out. You got to turn it upside down to smack the bottom of the bottle. And there's always a bunch of ketchup left at the bottom that you can't get out, which is just wasteful. So that is an example of good UI, but bad UX. And then on the other hand, you have this clunky looking bottle. It's made out of plastic, so it's squeezable, and you're able to control the amount of ketchup that comes out. The upside down bottle design allows all the ketchup to get to the lid, so there's no waste. But you have to admit, between the two of them, it's not as good looking as the glass bottle one, right? So the squeezable plastic ketchup bottle represents good UX, and more focused on UX more than UI, whereas the glass bottle, again, is UI over UX. So which one do you think most people would buy? I am confident to say that I think most households probably own a plastic squeezable ketchup bottle, the UX version. And that really shows how important usability is, and that UX is actually more important than UI. And whenever my designers are stuck on a design decision where they have this one UI design that looks so much better, but then there's another one that has better UX, I always say go for the one with the better UX, because it's kind of proven here with the ketchup as an example. Now let's start talking about UI and UX design thinking. So if any of you have ever taken a course on UX design, or even if you just Google design thinking, you will find 5 key things that you need to do to build good UX. For today, I'm only going to talk about the first one. Oh, never mind. I thought something was glitchy on my end. I'm only going to talk about the first one, which is empathize. I'm just going to scrap the other 4. Personally, I believe that this phase alone is the most important one and worthy on elaborating, but also because I only have 5 minutes on this section. So how do we empathize? So when you're designing product, the best judge of your product is going to be your user. But often when you're designing and building the product, you are probably a product designer, or maybe you're a graphic designer, maybe you're an engineer. Rarely ever is the creator actually the end user or the target audience, right? They might not even be able to relate with the user all that much. But that's okay, because learning about your user is key. The easiest way is to talk to one, observe them. What is their daily routine like? What context will they use your product or any other factors that could affect their decision making? And if you can, the best way to empathize is to walk in their shoes. So there's this case study for a public transit system. Picture a boardroom of high-paying executives making key decisions that will affect the UX of the public transit system. But there was one big flaw in this picture. Can anyone guess? So these high-paying executives, they all have fancy cars and drivers. None of them actually take public transit. So how can they empathize with the user if they're so removed from the transit experience? Well, there's a few solutions to this. The obvious one is having the executives start taking the transit. And every company has their own strategy or techniques on how they empathize with the user. I think Amazon or Tesla or some big tech company, during decision-making meetings, they would leave an empty chair in the boardroom, and it would be reserved for the user. And no one actually sits there. It's like a ghost. It's a hypothetical user. But it's a way to remind others to imagine that the user is there, and whenever they're pitching their ideas, to always look at that ghost chair and ask them the question and imagine what their response would be. So there's many ways. Everyone has their own strategy to empathize. Okay, so let's move on. Let's say you are working on a product, you have an idea, you think it's great and looks good, but you may not realize that you yourself have biases where you are intentionally isolating users. So what do I mean by biases? For example, accessibility. I used to design without consideration for the colorblind because I wasn't colorblind. So whenever I designed something with color, I wasn't really thinking or considering the colorblind or colorblindness. And there was apparently, it's very common form of colorblindness where people can't differentiate red and green. And I was using red and green without realizing that in my designs. And I was designing art for math questions at Knowledgehook. And they look like this. They would see, so people with red-green color blindness, which is very common, would instead see all gray triangles or beige. Luckily, we recently recruited a colorblind employee, so now I just ask him to look at everything now. But so anyways, if I don't empathize for color blindness, 8% of students, which is the percentage of people with this color blindness, would not be able to answer this question fairly. And it's not that they are failing math, but the UX is failing them. And it doesn't even just apply to color blindness. Age is another one. How many kindergarten students do you think can answer this question? Probably 0, because at that age, they haven't even learned grade level reading. And this question requires reading to answer the question. This also applies to new immigrant students who haven't learned the language yet. If they didn't answer this question correctly, it's likely not because they are bad at math. It's probably because they are bad at reading. So how can we fix this question so we give every student a fair advantage? Oh, here's one solution. We correct the color blindness issue by changing the color so it's not red, green and red. Figma actually have tools where you can simulate your design against different color blindness. So you check it before you send it off. And we also eliminated the reading disadvantages by creating a language-free way to interpret math questions. So rarely need to you really need to read for this question. So almost any age group can, or any language person can answer this question. So when you can empathize with your audience, it can make such a huge difference in your product. Like, just think about this. Think of what the increased chances for kindergarten students to be introduced to higher grade content. So, because currently questions like these are reserved for maybe like grade 3, maybe even grade 5. But if kindergartens can answer this question, then we're really disrupting the education industry. So that's enough about design thinking. So let's move on to something more technical, some more technical knowledge that I can impart on you guys. So I want to talk about a few simple tips that I have for improving UX with UI, because I don't really have that much time. So I'm just going to give you some key things. One is visual hierarchy, and the other one is using awesome words or UX copywriting. And then we're going to jump into Figma and do a demo there. So visual hierarchy is so important in UI. It is about designing your content so that you emphasize the order of importance. So that your user looks at the most important thing first. If you look at the example on the left, it's very cluttered. Don't know what to click on first. It's overwhelming. And if you look at the example on the right, it's much better, as I'm reading right there. Don't be afraid to use white space. White space can give breathing room and help users focus on what the most important action is. And actually, in order to, you don't have to worry about, a lot of people make the mistake of trying to fit too much stuff onto a page because they want to put all the information there. But what UI is really about is creating a flow so that you guide them to where they need to go. So I'm just going to jump into this example of what a user flow looks like. And when you're designing for UI, you should always start with the user flow. And this is where you have an idea of where each one of your interactions will lead into, and how are you going to get your user to the end page that you want them to go. So you don't have to fit everything in a page, because as long as you kind of create this flow, you can keep your pages really simple. So it'll be more screens, but less cluttered. Here's another example of visual hierarchy. On the left, you'll see that there's three actions, and they're blue buttons. There's no hierarchy between them because they're all blue and they are all of same equal weight. And in order to proceed, the user have to carefully read each button, and then they have to use more cognitive brain cells to select the right one for them. On the right-hand side, there is a clear differentiation between the primary action. The primary action is the main action you want them to do. In this case, it's the blue button, login me. And then the secondary actions are designed a lot lighter, and that gives even more contrast to the primary action. My rule of thumb is if there are more than one primary action on the page, then don't use a primary button at all. So if your primary button is blue and there's more than one, don't even use blue, use all secondary. Because if you utilize a heavy contrast color like this blue, for example, as your primary button throughout your entire UI, what happens if you use it consistently enough, your user will feel familiar with your UI and begin to trust the primary button and click on it wherever you place them without even reading or thinking. You may even catch yourself doing this often. For example, when's the last time you went through a terms of service flow where you had to read the terms of service and then click agree, I agree at the end. You probably do it so automatically that you don't think too much about it, but I'm pretty sure most cases the I agree would be a primary button and you just kind of scroll and then click. They say good UX is invisible because it allows the person to navigate so smoothly with very little thinking. So if you don't have to think about it and you get to where you need, that's a definition of good UX. The second part is awesome words. That's your copy, the text, and the messaging in the UI, because the words will help users navigate the UI. Here's some quick examples that I have. When you use good copy, you can improve the amount of conversions and clicks that you get. I just pulled out 2 tricks that I think is very simple to remember when you're creating copy. Usually with UX copy, it is a special field. But I do think if you're interested in UI and UX, it's good to kind of brush up on your UX copywriting as well. And 2 tricks that I have is, number 1, let users know what they're getting. So being more concise. So instead of, in this example with all the orange buttons, instead of download, maybe say download my ebook. Or maybe instead of submit, say generate my quote. It's a lot more clear and it takes out the hesitation from users on clicking on it because you make it very clear what's coming up next when they click the button. And then the second one is express value for your users. In this example, instead of recent jobs, if you change that to find your dream job, it sounds a lot better. The users can see the value and you're making them feel like they will benefit from clicking on it. So those are 2 quick tips. And now let's jump into Figma and learn how to use Figma. So I'm not sure where everybody's skill level is for Figma, but hopefully you all got the memo to install it. And this is basically the dashboard and user interface of Figma. When you need to create a new file, all you have to do is click on Design File, and you can also go into your drafts to open a new file. I prepared a file for this presentation, so I'll just open that for you. So yeah, I'm going to show you guys live how to build in Figma. And I'm going to tell you some differences between how an amateur might build in Figma versus how a pro might build in Figma. Aesthetically, the result of both these people's designs may come out the same, but really the difference the pro has against the amateur is when they utilize all the features in Figma, they can improve their workflow 10 times. Because usually when you're designing something, it's not just one screen. Oftentimes you're designing a website maybe with multiple pages, and within each page you might have multiple interactions, and then you got to mock up every single instance of these. So you might end up with maybe 20 to 50 designs in your Figma file. Even if it is just one page, sometimes you even have to mock up different screen sizes. Maybe you have to show the mobile version, the tablet version, and the desktop version. So it's never just one screen. So improving your workflow is so important for the professional, because when you have to do a lot of design iterations, which is definitely a thing in the industry, you have to be able to make edits very quickly. And if you have 50 plus designs to alter every time there's design iterations, if you're manually having to go in to adjust little things and finicky things, it ends up being very tedious and adds up to a lot of hours. So, that's why Figma is so powerful, because they thought of all that. And I do think it is the most powerful tool in UI UX right now. And I used to use Adobe XD, so I'm a huge fan ever since I converted to Figma. And now Adobe is buying Figma because it's just that good. I love Figma. Okay, so what I did is I've created a simple UI design mockup just for this exercise. It's basically like a little math challenges activity app. I have a little prototype here. It's just a simple design where there's some cards and activities. You press play, and I have two mockups here. One is this flow, and then when you click on play, a pop-up window. The idea is a pop-up window appears, where you can confirm to interact with it. So for this demo, I'm going to recreate this modal. A pop-up window, sorry. It's also called a modal in industry. So there's different terms that you may learn over time. I would love to have to demo creating this because it's a little bit more complicated, but for time, I think we only have enough time to recreate this pop-up window. So let's get started. Just going to drag this down as we go through these steps. So the first thing a pro would do is they would start to add their color styles and text styles. What I've prepared ahead of time is a style guide. Some of you probably already know what a style guide is. If you're working for a brand or a company or maybe an existing product, likely they already have some colors that they're using in their product that you have to consistently use. So they may already have provided you some of this. If not, then usually you can still add color styles and text styles as you design. So I wanted to be clear that the amateur designer and the pro designer both have access to this. The only difference is that what the pro Figma user is going to do is they're going to add it to their Figma color styles library. So I'm going to do that right now. You just click on the color, and then you'll see here on the right-hand side, fill, you'll see the color now. And instead of clicking on here to look at the settings, you're going to click on these 4 dots. It's called Style, and then the Color Styles window will pop up. Right now, there's no color styles added, so we're going to add our first one. Just press this plus button, and then I'm going to name this black. So now we have our first color. So if you look on our right-hand panel again, you're going to see we have our color palette and our new style added here. I'm going to just demo it quick. If I draw shape here, under fill, instead of having to find the color or put the text, the hex code in, which is what the amateur may have to do, I would just have to click on the 4 dots, and now my new color style is right here. So I'm getting the color changes done in a lot fewer clicks, and that adds up when you're doing hours and hours of design. So I'm just going to add one more. I'm not going to add them all just for this demo, but I'm going to add this white as well because I will be using white for the pop-up window. And even though it's a very simple hex code, still adding it as a color swatch is going to save me a lot of time. So always encourage that anytime you're using a color very often, just to add it as a color style. So now you can see there's 2 color styles in my color styles library. I'm actually going to do the same thing with text. It works the same way. So I'm just going to capture these 2 texts that I have with the star next to it. 16-point text is the recommended size for web viewing, for legibility and reading. So it's a good standard to go by. So when you click on the text and just make sure that the text properties here on the right is correct, is what you want. And then again, the text will also have 4 dots. And when you click on this, it'll be the text styles now. And we currently have no text styles. We just add our first one. And I'm going to call this base text. And I'm going to use base text for things like body text or paragraph text. And just for fun, I wanted the headings that I use in this UI to be just a little bit more funky. So I added this other one with a different font, and I'm going to call it More Fun Font. So you can see that we have our base text added now, and I'm just going to add this one. I'll call it More Fun Font. Really trying to convince myself here. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this list here. So we've added some of the colors that I'll be using here. You'll notice that there's an image here. I'm not adding these colors because the image has the colors itself, so it's actually not part of the UI, it's just part of the image. But I added the black and the white, and that's all I've used in this pop-up. One other thing you can add is effect styles. So you'll notice I added here. The Pro will add effect styles. And effect styles is basically when you click, I'm just going to click on this. You'll see that if you scroll down at the very bottom of the right-hand panel, you'll see effects. And under effects, you can choose drop shadow, inner shadow, or layer blur. Let me click something that doesn't have a drop shadow. So if I want to, I'm just going to choose this element here. And if you go under effects, you'll see that nothing's there. But if you add plus, you would create a standard drop shadow, and then you can change the properties here. So if I want it to be a soft blur, maybe I want it like a blue, you can see that there's now a drop shadow here. I'm going to just remove that. What I want to do is I want to pick up this drop shadow right here. So I'm just going to click on it since I have it done already. And you can see that all the properties are set to how I want it. And I just, again, click the 4 dots, and I'll add my first effects styles, pressing the plus, and I'll call this soft shadow. All right, so if you look at our dashboard, we're pretty set. And obviously, as you do more and more UI, that palette, that list is going to get quite big. Okay, now we're going to move on to components. I'm just going to demonstrate it because it's easier than me explaining. But I think the best example I'm going to use is this image. So this is just a PNG image that I have. On the left-hand side, I'm going to leave. What I did is all I did was drag it from my computer into the Figma file. And I did size it already to the size I need it. I'm going to duplicate this on the right-hand side. This is the Pro side because the Pro is going to create the component, but I just want to leave this here because the amateur, just so you guys can see the difference. So on the top, when you click on anything, you'll notice that on the top part of the top nav bar, you'll see this diamond that's made out of 4 diamonds. And that's the create component action. So I'm just going to click on it. So you'll notice that it now turns purple. And the purple means that it's a component. And you also see under the layer section that it's in, you also see that it's highlighted in purple with the 4 diamonds. And that's something that when you use Figma, you'll want to remember because it really helps you differentiate and find things a lot easier. Still, what is a component? So now we're going to click on this asset tool on this top left here. And you're going to notice that, hey, there's an image here. So I'm going to undo once. Let me undo. So now there's no purple because I've undoed it. I don't know if that's a word, but now I'm going to click the create component, and you'll see it's going to pop up under the asset panel. So what that does is it's created it's captured it into our library. So now it becomes this drag and drop component. I can actually drag it from that asset area and place it anywhere. So I can actually place it in any file in Figma. It doesn't even have to be in this file, but it's a really powerful tool when you're working and you need to grab things fast and to kind of organize all your elements there. So you can create components out of everything. Normally, buttons as well, you would create components of. So our pro has created a component where the amateur hasn't. I'm going to take that one step further. I'm going to create a variant. So I'm going to go back to my original mock-up here to show you guys what I did with this illustration. My vision is that with every different math activity, I wanted a different illustration. But in my mock-up, I don't want to keep repeating the same illustration. I want to make sure I can show that variation. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this component to create variants of each of the different illustrations. So you can do that by going to Properties, and then if you click on the plus sign, you'll see Variant now. And you will only see this if the item is already a component. So if I click on something that's not a component, you won't see Properties. So if you're wondering where it is, you have to make it a component first. So I'm going to press plus and Variant. And you'll notice now I have this dotted line box around my component. That means that everything that's within the box is going to be an additional variant. So let me it's still one variant right now. What you're gonna do is find this purple plus sign and press Add Variant. Give me a second. I just wanted it to be vertical. So now there's a duplicate of the original one. And I want to change this to a different image. So I'll just press into it. And actually, let me slow down a bit. So when I double click it, you'll notice that under Fill, it'll say Image. And that's where I'm going to replace the image. So I already have my images on file, and I'm just going to swap it out. So now I have, if you click on the whole box, you'll see there's two variants now. There's this one, and I'm going to name this one Algebra. And I'm going to name this one Operations. So I have two images now, but how come on my asset panel, I only still see this one? And it's because this is still one component. It's just almost like a variation of it, but it still maintains as one component. So when I drag this in now, it's still going to look the same, but you'll notice that under Properties now, there's going to be a drop down. And this is going to allow me to toggle between the images. And this is so great, especially if you're doing something that like navbar with drop down icons, anything that has, even this Figma where there's a lot of icons, because when you're, let's say the amateur is just dragging in images from their computer, they might not be able to control the size very well and might mess up their layout. So it's just a much neater way to work. I'm actually going to add two more images to this. So I had one image regarding numbers. And I'm going to add one more, which will be, I'll call it measurement. So now if you look at the component that I dragged in, I can also drag it in again. since there's so many like items on the page. Now you'll see that I have 4 different images. So this will definitely allow me to toggle between this a lot easier. So that is just the difference between when you create variants versus when you don't. And you really see the workflow improve later on. Okay, now let's get to one of my favorite parts of Figma is using auto layout. This feature is just a miracle. I love it so much. I don't have time to recreate like all the different items like the button. So what I did is, so we created this together. And I want to make sure I organize everything because I'm a pro. What I did here is I actually have an artboard on the side. And I call this artboard the Pro's component library because the pro is very organized and he's going to make sure that any component that he created and captured, he's going to neatly organize it either in another file or in an artboard on the side, label it accordingly so his teammates know where it is. So I already have an area here where I'm going to make sure I put this for my under images and icons. And you'll see I've already went ahead and prepped a component with variants for my buttons as well. So you'll see that this one also has the purple dash lines, which means that this is one component with different variants. And if you click on it, you'll see there's 4 variants. Variants are very, very common for buttons because buttons have different states. When you hover over it, you have hover state, a press state, maybe you want a disable state. I even did one state that's with an icon because to me, they're kind of the same family. And that just, when you throw in the primary button, it just lets you choose very easily and swap in and out. So I already have that prepped. I also, even though it doesn't take me too long to create that heading style, I also just made it a component. I just love like being able to drag and drop everything. And if you want to, as an extra step, you can even, if you're using, working with a lot of a certain screen size very often, sometimes I like to capture these as components too. Because what that allows me to do is every time I'm mocking up something, I'm looking at a blank canvas, I can just drag in my background and just start designing right on there. There's also another way you can do that. You can also go under prototype. Is it? Oh no, you up here under frames. This is where you can create a new frame. And if you click on frame, you'll see that all these devices are available for you. For example, if I click iPhone 8, it will generate that size. But every company might have their own sizes that they want to work with. So both ways works. Okay, back to auto layout. So I'm just going to go ahead and recreate this now. And I'm just going to drag in all the components into this that's in this modal. I already have all the components set up here. So I'm going to need my image. I'm going to need this heading style here. I'm going to need my Play Now button. And there's, for the text, I have the text style set up already, so I simply have to create a text box. And actually, I'm just going to copy and paste from here to here. And you'll notice the text style is different, no problem. I'm just, again, just have to change that to my base text and center it. Let me change all the other text too. Okay, super fun algebra. And this one, I remember I had variants with the icon, so I just have to toggle this to icon on, and then it gives me the one that I set up prior to this demo, and I just have to change the text. All right, so The exit button, I'll drag it over here, but I'm going to get into that a bit later. I'm not going to use it just now. So now I'm just going to select everything here, and I'm going to add it as an auto layout. So if you right click, you should be able to see add auto layout. So what did this do? This actually stacked the elements one on top of another. So if you look at, if I just select this, you can see that one is right on top of another. And now we can mechanically alter the spacing between the items. So if you see right now, it's set at 5 pixels. That's where the pink lines are indicating. You can set it wide apart. So you can see, and now they're separated by 40 pixels. But I'm going to want it to be 16 pixels. You're going to notice there's this big gap right here. And that is because when I created this text box, I didn't alter this frame. So you can see the auto layout is working because it's responsive with the rest of the components. But to remove this gap, I need to make sure that it's flush to this design. An amateur would just drag it like this and just manually do it like that. But Figma is so amazing. They have ways to create it a more responsive version. Actually, I'm going to duplicate it so you guys can see the advantages over using this hug feature. So over here, I'm going to, for my amateur panel, I'm going to just manually tweak it. And here on my pro, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go up here. You'll notice this is your width and this is your height. And this is referring to the text box. Right now it's fixed, which means that it's fixed at whichever the number here is. So it's fixed at 155 pixels. But if I choose hug contents, it's going to hug the contents of my text. And the great thing about this is if I want to add a longer line of text, that breaks to a new line. So you see, now there's 4 lines of text, but the information and elements below it adjusted accordingly. What if I did that over here to where the amateur had tweaked it manually? So if I just paste the new text in there, what's happening is it's breaking out of the text box because the text box is set at fixed. And that means that any content in there is just spilling over, is going to overlap, and it's going to kind of ruin the whole auto layout. And if an amateur is kind of lazy, they're just going to keep manually tweaking. But if they have this process where they set it up ahead of time, they can create such responsive text. So in this case, I just dragged it, and if I remove that line, now we're going to end up with this big space again, unless you manually tweak it. Whereas in this example, everything just moves responsively. I love it. Okay, now we just have to create the rest of the box. I'm just going to drag this over here to this dark area so that you can see that I'm still missing the entire box and background. So I have this whole auto layout selected. And what I'm going to do is go to fill and just add my white box. So now all the content has a background fill. It's really tight to the content. So how do you adjust the spacing? So just like how we adjusted the space between the items, you'll see that in the auto layout panel, there's a section for horizontal padding and vertical padding. So I'm just going to add maybe 32 all around to give it that white space. And there. Now you can see that the edges are exactly 32. And the great thing about this is you're not a designer that's just tweaking it manually. You're actually assigning a specific number, which means that when you hand this off to an engineer or a developer, you can give them this exact number, and that means that whatever they build is very close to what you intended in your design. Also, there's rounded corners in this, so I'm just going to, the rounded corners settings is over here, called corner radius. I'll just make it 16. And now it looks like our box here. Oh, it looks like I'm missing my drop shadow. Remember that drop shadow I captured earlier? Now I just go in under effects and I can pick my soft shadow, and there's my shadow. One really great thing about auto layout is, let me see if, okay, let me move this off to the side. I'm still going to compare this one, even though I'm not going to go do the background for that, but just know that this one is not an auto layout and this one is an auto layout. The great thing about auto layout is you can actually change the order of the contents inside an auto layout. So example, if I want this heading to be at the very top of the pop-up, all I have to do is press up, up, and everything just shifts. You know, it's so beautiful. If you didn't set up auto layout and you need to do this adjustment, actually, is this an auto layout? It is. Let me ungroup it. Take it back down a notch. So what an amateur would do if they didn't use auto layout is they would, okay, I have to move this heading up here. Okay, now that's overlapping and I have to click these two things and move it down here. And it can become very finicky, especially if you may not know how much text is here. There's usually a lot of jiggling it around, and you may have to like push your pixels a lot, and that could be very tedious. And whereas this is just almost automatic, so you really want to utilize auto layout to create efficiencies. I almost forgot about this exit button. So I'm just going to drag this exit button into the auto layout. Let's see. I can actually, oh, another thing I forgot to mention is in auto layout, you can actually use the auto layout panel to choose the alignment. So I cannot align the X button along with everything, but what I can do is I can just create another auto layout for it. And then I can use this width component and choose fill container. So now this X is in an auto layout and its own auto layout inside the auto layout. And it's justified to the left. And I can justify it to the right. You can still see it's a little bit off, so I'm actually going to undo that because this exit button is actually not following the grid of the auto layout. If you look at my example, it actually kind of, let me draw a line here. It actually kind of overlaps. And to be honest, my exit button is not based on where the X is. It's actually a circular icon, and that, oh, where'd it go? And that signifies like that's kind of the touch point, because the X is kind of small. It's really hard to hit it with your cursor. So in better UX design, you always try to make your touch points a little bit bigger. So you'll notice that this is actually quite a bit bigger and it overlaps with this image, which is why we can't have it stacked on top of one another without it looking weird. So Figma actually just came out with a solution to this year. So I'm really happy about that. And it's this button this feature right here. It's called absolute position. So you throw this into the auto layout because you want it to be grouped together. And then you click absolute position. So what this does is now it floats this element and you can place it anywhere you want. So even if you place it like here, if you drag your whole element, it will stay anchored to it. So in this case, we want to place it right here and make sure it has the right spacing. And an example of the absolute position, I'm going to go back to my mock-up here, is this green check mark. This green check mark is placed here using absolute positioning, and that's how you can kind of get it to overlap certain elements that's not following the grid. Yeah, so we've created this. I just want to show you how easy it is to, now that we have this design auto layout, how easy it is to create variations of this. So I'm just going to duplicate this, and let's duplicate it 3 times. For this one, I want to make sure I do a screen for playing operations. And then this one I want to do for an activity for easy fractions. See how we changed the image so easily? And if we didn't set up the components with variants, we wouldn't be able to work so efficiently. So that's why it's so important to take the extra time to create components, because it just makes your workflow so much faster. And I just wanted to share one last demo of, if you have to do design iterations, what are the benefits between the amateur and the pros build? So I'm just going to quickly drag maybe just some sample elements.
Rita, I just wanted to give you a quick time
Oh,
heads
up. Okay.
So we do have about 8 minutes left. If you want to quickly go over just what you
I would like you guys to join the file and try to play, do a demo. Oh, actually, no, we have to do Q&A, right? Yeah. Too bad we don't have time for a demo. Anyways, just very quickly, if I adjusted my master component of this green check mark, let's say they didn't like the color and they want it darker. If I adjusted my master component, all the elements, all the child elements will change with it. So I only have to change this one instance, whereas the amateur will have to click into every single instance and manually change the color. So sorry, I didn't have time to, there's so much to learn in Figma. It's such a wonderful tool. I really encourage anyone in all fields to use it. I even have team members who use it just for presentation. And yeah, I guess let's jump to Q&A. One thing I want to mention is that Figma also has plugins that, about the colorblind thing. If you ever needed extra, like, it's kind of like a widget. If you wanted something like a tool that makes you work faster, there's probably a plugin for that. And also, if you look into resources like design systems like Material Design or Bootstrap, you'll be able to brush up on your UX by learning about what certain components do. So when you design them, you have the best, you're more informed of what the best options are when it comes to UI design. I'll end it at that because I'm gonna go over time. I have 6 minutes left. So yeah, is there any questions? I haven't been checking the comments, so maybe I'll just, Laura, were you able to go through the comments to see if...
Yeah, I can read them out to you if you'd
Okay.
Like. So one question was, what is some advice you'd give to like entry-level UX designers and the tools to practice visual design skills?
Oh, back on Figma, actually, I'm going to share this again. I wanted to elaborate on this. Let me share screen really quickly. Okay, for anyone, and I still do this too. So if you go back to your dashboard, Figma has a community. It's an open source community where you can look at other people's files that they've shared. So let's say I'm into visual assets. I want to look at visual assets and just talk about Figma now, not FigJam. You'll be able to see, maybe visual assets isn't the best. Maybe I'll look at design systems or something. Anything you're looking to look up, just go to community and type in it, and you'll be able to find so many free resources of files and see how people build things. And I find that that's actually the best way to learn, is to find a file that appeals to you, and you can just open it up or even just preview them and see how they built it in Figma. And yes, it's not just UI. They also have UX stuff, because a lot of people use Figma just for user flows. So, and there's a lot of plugins just for user flows as well. So I think that's a great place to start. And again, if you look up material design, which is one of the first design systems from Google, it's open source. And what I find helps is, if you go in their components section, they write so much documentation on every little UI element that they have. And they tell you when to use this and when not to use this. So I think learning about when to use something and not, and when's the best time to use or how to use something, is really the best way you can brush up your UI UX. So see, there's lots of documentations of, the different types, and then usually it will tell you, we're very detailed documentation on like the usage and everything of every element. Adobe also has a design system called Adobe Spectrum. They have really good documentation too. If you Google design system, there's a lot of big companies that make it open source now. I would read into it. Is there another question?
So another question that we got was, what are some resources that we can use to get images?
If you're just doing placeholders, again, community, you can get images, but obviously just if it's a personal project, or make sure you check up on the licenses of those things. And sometimes in plugins, one plugin that I really like is Iconify. So, if you're just creating a mock-up but you don't have the resources to design a lot of icons, there are actually plugins that give you placeholder icons. So if I needed the play button, that play icon that I used in this demo is actually from this plugin. All I do is I click on it, and then I import the icon into my file, and I can use it immediately for my mockups. And I think there's similar plugins for images and avatar. There's like fake avatar profile pictures that you can use in your mockups for prototyping purposes. So those are, it's all in Figma. Your answer is in Figma. I think we have time. Maybe one more question, I can squeeze it in.
Could you please show us how to prototype interactively, or just briefly talk about the steps?
Okay. Let's just prototype this button really quick to how can we make it hover. So, whoops. I'm going to, let's see. Sorry. I'll create this, just a new frame here. I'm going to put my primary button here, and actually, let's use our new design and see if we can make the button hover effect. So I'm going to create, I think I have to do different frames. Sorry, 1 second. This maybe not a good 1 minute question, but if you guys want to stay, feel free. Are we getting kicked out? No? Okay. so I duplicated this, but the only difference now is for this one, I'm going to change it. I don't know if I changed it to hover. Yeah, actually, I didn't set it up. I might lose my icon, and I don't want that. So just for demo's sake, I'm just going to quickly tweak the color here to a lighter color to show that that's my hover effect. So this is my default, and this is my hover. Now, we've been working on the design panel the whole time, but if you go to prototype, this is where you prototype everything. So all you have to do is your starting point, you press plus, and then this will appear, and you just have to, you'll see this dot here. All you have to do is drag it to this, and it'll tell you like what interaction you want. So I'm just going to say while hovering, and then navigate to, and that's the file. So now I'm going to play this interaction and see how that works. See if it works. Oops, I have it under this weird mobile view, but you can see that it's not, see that the hover is working. So it's all under the prototype panel. And obviously there is a bunch of options. So once you start exploring it, you'll notice that there's a lot of different animations that they provide here, not just for hover, but they even have like smart animations that, you can do carousel effects and stuff. If we have additional questions, should we follow up in Discord, or
Yeah,
I feel like I'm going over time.
Sorry, so there is going to be a workshop Q&A link sent out. So the code for that, if anyone has any questions, is KHWR. Yeah, it's right on the screen. Oh, sorry. This is for Discord participation.
Oh, Alan had a good question. I didn't have time to show, but I can keep going on if you don't stop me, Laura.
I mean, if you have time, you can feel free to answer them.
Okay, so he asked about why did I just duplicate the pop-up, and the reason why was I was feeling a bit of pressure. But one thing I really wanted to show to you guys is, once you've designed this pop-up is probably going to be your default pop-up style going forward in your UI design. So you're going to want to capture that, as Alan mentioned. So what I normally do is, you see in the Pros component library, at the very bottom, I set up something called a pop-up template. So basically, I want to capture this pop-up as a template. So it's not the exact same one, but it has all the properties of a generic pop-up. It has the heading and an image. And then I created that as a component. And if you guys want, why don't I just share this link in the chat? Anyone can try to join. What I did is I duplicated a bunch of that modal. So if you guys want to jump in and see if you can interact with, one second, the comment section isn't letting me input. Maybe you guys can help me add that link to share with everyone. I sent in the private chat. Yeah, see if you guys can all join in. I'm going to make sure everyone has edit access. Feel free to sabotage. So with that pop-up, you go in the assets panel and find that pop-up here and just drag it next to, claim one of your boxes. Hey, no, Alan, this one's mine. Claim one of your boxes. But what I'm going to do is when you drag it in order to edit it, you have to detach it from the component, because It depends, but normally with something with so many elements in it, you actually have to detach from components. So when you right click, you have to press detach. Unfortunately, this means that it's no longer attached to the component itself, but it allows you to edit so quickly. So let me show you guys how I can rebuild this at an even faster pace, because now I have this template. All I had to do is drag my image in. I'll delete this placeholder. I just changed this to play super fun algebra. I move it down because that's where it was originally. I changed this text. I forgot what the text was. Oh, actually, I'll just copy and paste. And then I can remove this no button because it wasn't in the original. And I need this, actually this is broken. So I'll just drag in a new button and delete this one. I don't know why it's broken. Turn it on with icon and press play now. So if I was working, I'll be able to create this new modal in seconds. And that's why it's so important to build the Figma file properly with components. And yeah, it just makes you work so much faster. Yeah, Sharon shared some great answered the question for free images, and those are really good suggestions. Someone put documentation heart. Totally disagree. It's so painful to create it. I'm so glad there's open source for us to use, but to create your own documentation, it's like, oh my God, designer nightmare. Wen had a good question. When you improve a component for another iteration, the component in the previous version will change. How do you keep both iterations? So it really depends on your situation, but what I do is if I know for sure, so for example, when I had, you see how there's a primary button and a secondary button? Really, they're the same. It's just the only difference is the color. But I made sure to create them as different components because ultimately they're being used for different components and use cases. So let's say I don't have the secondary button and I only had the primary as an instance. So let me actually drag the primary in. When I clone it to make my secondary, what I'm going to do, actually, let me see. There might be two ways I can do this. I'm going to just do two, and I'm going to call them both secondary. Secondary and secondary. For the first one, I'm going to leave it as is. And for the second one, I'm going to detach it because all I needed was to kind of steal the similar properties of the original one. And now that I detach it, it's just a free element now. So now I can just go ahead and change the colors that I need it for. And now I just create it as a new component. So it actually does not follow the initial component at all. It's a completely new component. Now this way, if you, so I'm just going to delete this. So if you want to keep it as a child, so that let's say, hey, let's change the secondary color. So the one on the right is a clone. Let's again change the color. And And the way you can see that it's a clone is, actually they're both, this one is actually not the master, because I dragged it out of this one, and this is actually the master one. So these are actually both clones. So maybe this is not going to work because this is actually a clone of a clone. So I might have to redo this. Let me see if it will work though. I'm going to, so it's always important to, Figma already thought of this. If you need to find the main component, you just right click and you can go to main component, and it'll point you to where that component's master is. And you can only edit the master to edit everything else. If you edit a clone, it's not going to affect the master. So let's say I don't want round corners anymore. I'm going to press 0. You can see that all my clones now have no more rounded corners. So I guess if you want to keep your clones kind of to adjust with the same properties as the primary, then this is a good way to build them. I don't really know if you can create like sub-variants, because ideally for the secondary, I would like to create all variants as well. I'm pretty sure you can, but yeah, this just shows another very efficient way to work. Rishan's question, the buttons were not PNG images. So they're just created using a rectangle shape, and then I just added text over it and just styled it using auto layout. Okay, I'm just gonna check how everyone's doing with, yeah, I see a few people were able to clone successfully the original mock-up. So that's really great. You can actually also do nested auto layouts. You can do auto layouts within auto layouts. So for example, is this one mine? Let's say I want this super fun algebra test, this heading to be closer to the button, because maybe aesthetically I like it that way. So now you can see that this is an auto layout which hosts everything inside, but you can see that this illustration and this descriptor text is also in another auto layout. So if you actually ungroup it, it will break away, and now everything is in one auto layout. You can also manage this by looking at your layers. You can see that how many auto layouts are nested in there. So again, let's say I want these two to be closer together. I just have to click on them and click on this, and then it's already in an auto layout, but you can add an auto layout again. And what this allows you to do is you can, let's say I want 8 pixels so that they're really close together. You can do it like that. And within this auto layout, you can actually like customize the padding that's only relevant around here and not the whole entire pop-up. So if I wanted a really big gap in the bottom, for example, like 32. Oh, actually, if you want to affect maybe the bottom padding but not the top, you just press this independent paddings on the right, and then you're able to adjust that flexibly. So auto layout does not cripple any flexibility in design, because you can actually nest so much auto layouts and then create customizations, and you're still able, but it's you don't have to do it the painful pushing pixel way. No, I failed calculus in high school. And you know what? It's actually really, so I work at this math education company, and I suck at math. And I actually find that my empathy for people who suck at math is really high. So that's what's really, it actually turned out to be a benefit because now I'm able to empathize to people like me that were terrible in math. And when I see content that I don't understand, I know that those kids that are like me don't understand. So I work extra hard to try to improve the design on that end. So it's kind of funny. It actually became an advantage working at a math education company to suck at math. Yes, we all have hope. Anyways, thanks again. I'm off now. So I hope you guys wish you guys good luck for the rest of the Designathon, and I hope you guys learned a lot during this workshop.
Yeah, thank you for joining us and giving such an amazing presentation.
Thank you.
Any other questions, if it's okay with you, after this can be asked on Discord?
Yeah. Where do I find it again?
I think they're going to be making a separate channel for Q&A.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Have a good night.